are you to tell people and their kids what they should think, what they should be exposed to, and what ideologies they should prescribe to? It's utter nonsense. Once again, we are here to talk about another one of Disney's not-so-secret agendas that are continuously showing up, these woke, race-bent, gender-swapped sort of narratives that Disney is basically accumulating different forms of IP and basically turning them all on their head in order to be able to preach to the public. So this is just one more victim of this woke agenda that Disney has, as well as the rest of the liberals of the world. Because as we know, Disney is a multinational conglomerate. Their television shows and their content is distributed worldwide, including to the children of Australia, as well as the US and everywhere else. They're more than willing as a company to make exceptions for places like China because they want to be able to sell their products to the Chinese people, but they're more than willing to censor this stuff or to toe the so-called party line like the Chinese wants them to because they want their money. But as far as the West is concerned, Disney is more than happy to tell us to shove it. They're going to indoctrinate your kids into this nonsense, whether you like it or not. Now, over here at Bounding Into Comics, Disney breaks their Percy Jackson promise, race swaps Grover and Annabeth. Now, I'm in my mid-20s now. I read this as a young high schooler. These books were quite integral to developing my passion for all things mythology because it introduced me to this stuff at a very young age. It's part of the reasons why I went to university to study the subject of history. So on behalf of like all the sort of young kids out there, I was looking forward to them being able to engage in something like this and getting its own television show. It's a great series of young adult fiction that really tried its best to educate kids and get them interested in history, more specifically Western history. I'm well aware that the books weren't overly accurate. I realized that as I got older. But regardless, it did pique a generation of kids' interest in this topic. But once again, Disney has gained control over this as an IP and has decided to, rather than staying true to the books, they've decided to start race-bending characters all over again. And they swore that they would make this as accurate to the books as possible. It was the whole point of having a television series so that they could have the space and the time to be able to develop the story properly, unlike the films, which the films were just terrible. This was their opportunity to make it right and to be able to build out a very well thought out story and really well developed characters properly. So this is not off to a good start at all. So the Walt Disney Company continues to show their true colors as they broke another one of their promises with the race swapping of Annabeth Chase and Grover Underwood for their upcoming Disney series. Now, I'm well aware that people out there are going to turn around and say, oh, well, it's how well they play the character, Emily. It's how well they play the character that's truly meaningful. It doesn't matter what they look like. It's like, okay, for some of you out there, fine, I agree to an extent. But when they outright describe in the books how these characters look and there's reasoning behind it, like, for instance, Annabeth is this sort of California girl, blonde-haired, grey-eyed character because her mother Athena specifically has a thing for blondes, specifically blonde men. It's her thing, her kink, I guess. And so the overwhelming majority of Annabeth's siblings are all openly described in the books many, many times as being fair-skinned and blonde. But Disney doesn't care about that. They've already race-swapped characters like Grover before in the films. And he's described as well as being a fair-haired centaur with curly hair, bearded, goat man, essentially the guy out of Narnia. But they've decided to race swap them as well. And I understand, like, these kids have done nothing wrong, but they want to win over the fans. The majority of people that read this stuff are all in their 20s now. You honestly think it's not pissed them off and annoyed them? Like, if you recall, Disney promised when they first announced the series that it would be closely aligned with Disney's Hyperion best-selling book series by award-winning author Rick Riordan, with more than 180 million books in print globally. The promise was broken when Disney announced the casting for the series that race swaps Annabeth Chase and Grover Underwood. In the press release, Disney announced Annabeth will be played by Leah Savard Jeffries, while Grover will be portrayed by Aryan Simbahadri. I apologize because I know I've butchered those names. Disney previously announced that Walker Scobell would play Percy Jackson. In Riordan's first Percy Jackson book, The Lightning Thief, Grover is described in the opening pages. They describe in the book what Grover looks like. They've done illustrated books what Grover looks like. I mean, the guy he's allegedly does not look like a 12-year-old. He's significantly older. But that's not the point. The point of the character is to watch over Percy as he's developing into his powers and realizing who he is. He's a seeker, I think. He finds demigod children and brings them to this camp where children with divine parents are trained to defend themselves. This isn't the first time Grover has been race swapped. In the first live-action adaptation of the book distributed by the 20th Century Fox back in 2010, saw Grover portrayed by Brandon T. Jackson. However, this is the first time they have race-swapped Annabeth Chase. Rodham describes Annabeth in the books. She was probably my age, maybe a couple of inches taller and a whole lot more athletic looking. With her deep tan and her curly blonde hair, she was almost exactly what I thought a stereotypical California girl would look like. Except her eyes ruined the image. They were startling grey like storm clouds, pretty but intimidating. And she's described as looking like this over and over again throughout the books because she's essentially the love interest to Percy, so naturally he pays attention to her looks, as every teenage boy does to their girlfriend. And yet, Disney thinks it's a good idea to take a character that has been aesthetically planned out over and over again in order to preach to the woke demographic, in order to speak down and teach the audience that storylines don't matter, that characters and characterization doesn't matter, that graphic aesthetic doesn't matter. Everything can be changed and picked apart and torn apart and built into something new, rather than just making films and TV shows accurately based off of the books. That's what the majority of the fans actually want. They don't want random retellings of stories. Because I don't understand why they need to keep changing all this stuff to not only make it different, but make it so that you hardly recognize it at all. And then they get upset and then they tell the audience off for allowing their content to go broke. They blame the audience for not being willing to watch the crap that they put out, rather than admitting that what they're doing is pissing people off because people don't want revamped retellings and rehashings of stories. They just want the genuine article. That's all they want. Why is it so hard? It's literally written down on paper for you to plan out and create. Ryderin provides a description of her hair color and her skin tone. None of those match up to Leah. However, it does match up to how she's depicted in the graphic novel. Yes, it does. While Annabeth wasn't race swapped in the first live action film, they did fail to get her eye color and hair color correct, as Alexandra Daddario kept her dark brown hair. Yeah, see, and I wasn't too pleased as her as what was I? Must have been like 16, 15 at the time. That was not Annabeth to me. I put up with it and the movie was still reasonably crap. And they at least did try to get it more accurate in the second film, but I didn't even I think I watched it once. By then I'd grown out of it, but at least they were trying. Author Rick Riordan fully endorsed the race swaps, discussing Simadari's casting on his website. He wrote, "In his auditions for Grover Underwood, Arian won our hearts. He had me laughing out loud with his delivery and timing. He has a mixture of sweetness, humor, internal toughness that is perfect for our favorite satyr." Clearly, these kids are probably big fans. I mean, it's probably going to be the role of a lifetime for this Arian. This young bloke's probably over the moon if he's a fan of Ryderan's novels. And I can't blame him for that. I can't blame kids wanting to play characters like this. But it's still frustrating and besides the point. The point is to create content based off of these novels that are accurate. That's people fell in love with these characters for their entire characterization. And I don't understand. There's mixed race, there's black, white, there's indigenous people throughout these books. I don't understand why they can't have, what are they going to do with those characters? Are they even going to be in these? The mixed bag of kids of different backgrounds, different cultures, and different races that come together in this camp for demigods. I get, they're not all one color. So why did they feel the need to start race swapping the initial characters? Is it because they're all white and you can't have an all white main cast? Of course not, because this is Disney and this is 2022 when woke theology is paramount in Hollywood, and they have to teach young children that are of pale skin to hate themselves. As for Jeffries, he wrote, "Out of all the talented actors who looked at for this role, Leah Xavier Jeffries quickly became my number one choice for Annabeth. He added, Leah's exactly the way I imagined Annabeth in the books, as if smart, strong, and courageous, a true daughter of Athena who has zero patience for the foolishness of a certain seaweed brain. Watching her act with Walker and Arian I saw Annabeth Chase come to life. As soon as you see her on the screen, you will know what I mean. The wise girl has arrived. Bullshit. I call bullshit. You described exactly the way she looks in your books multiple times. There is no way you visualized Jeffries as Annabeth. Perhaps the way she portrays the character in terms of her acting is good, fine. Not to knock back the young woman's acting ability, but as far as what he actually visualized her at, it's ridiculous. And yet this isn't the first time that Ryderin has retconned characters in this. He's starting to slowly incorporate this sort of gender ideology into his books as time went on later, which, working for Disney, I'm not really all that surprised that that's what he's done, but it's frustrating because you start to feel like, and this is all stuff I've learned off of like nieces and nephews that have continued to read the books where I haven't, and they sort of start scratching their heads trying to understand why a character like Piper McLean goes from the daughter of Aphrodite, a preacher of love, is completely devoted to her partner, Jason, and then they just bumped him off apparently for whatever reason, and then she starts hooking up with a chick, and it's like, okay, she's supposed to be the love of her life, and then she hooks up with a woman by the end of the series. It's just more and more, as far as I'm concerned, indoctrination of children. This casting announcement and Ryderen's defense of it not only shows another of Disney's broken promises, but it highly indicates the series will be infected by the woke mind virus that has seemingly taken over the entire Walt Disney Company, as we know already from Disney's not-so-secret agenda of indoctrinating children into gender woke theology, taking away the power that parents have over what their children learn and their God-given right to determine what their children are exposed to in order to take it upon themselves. I expect the show to attempt to promote disordered lifestyles and immoral behavior in order to change hearts and minds, because that is indeed Disney's credo now, as made clear by the company's Bob Chapek when he stated, "There's a reason content is at the top of this list. For nearly a century, our company's stories have opened minds, inspired dreams, shown the world both as it is and how we wish it could be, and now more than ever before represented the incredibly diversity of our society. We are telling important stories, raising voices, and I believe changing hearts and minds." He declares. Who are you to tell people and their kids what they should think, what they should be exposed to, and what ideologies they should prescribe to? It's utter nonsense. This man and his lackeys in government and in the company itself have no right to push any agenda on anyone. And that's the whole point of it, changing hearts and minds and carrying on about how they've been the forerunners of change in the world. Like, the whole premise of Disney is meant to be centered around family. That was the idea that caused Walt to develop the Walt Disney Company and Disneyland itself. People like Chapek, people like Iger are not there to inspire children. They're not there for any of this. They're there to push an agenda and to get a hold of your children so that they can control the way your kids think. And this race swapping of characters in classic kids' books and novels and TV shows is just one symptom. It's one aspect of how people like Chapek, people like different forms of governors and politicians, both in the United States and around the world, seek to control how your kids think about not only the world, but about themselves. It's teaching them to be angry at themselves. It's teaching them to hate themselves and to hate other people. And it's despicable. But they're only doing it because, on one hand, it gives them control, and it also means that they retain power into the future, because if they can control the way your children think, they control how they develop ideologically into the future, and which means they're more likely to vote a certain way. This ties in perfectly to another article that recently came out, once again from Bounding into Comics. In the wake of the Disney Florida fallout, progressives call for mega corporations to become human rights leaders, as if these people care. Didn't Disney get into trouble when they shot that Mulan film too close to, what was it? One of those camps? Was it a camp? I think it may have been a labor camp, wasn't it, in China somewhere? And somewhere in the credits, they even thanked these people, despite the fact that they were persecuting a religious minority. And yet these people think that they can be human rights leaders and teach your kids how to love and what they should think about themselves and other people along gender and racial lines. Are you kidding me? The battle between the Walt Disney Company and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been a nasty one. This article essentially goes into how people like this guy, CEOs around the world, particularly multinational companies, seek to not only become what they call stakeholder capitalists, where they're not just out there to help their customers and to make money for their shareholders. They want to be advocates for morality and human rights, as if they're in a position to lecture the public on anything. So this is in regards to what the Florida government has done or is attempting to do to Disney by revoking their rights over Reedy Creek and self-governance in response to Disney's desire, as previously discussed in the last article, wanting to expose children to woke ideology and preventing it from happening in schools. And now the left is essentially turning to CEOs and saying, you must get involved and pick a side because we want you to start pushing back against governments and the public that they represent in order to push these ideologies. And these people agree with it. They want to be human rights leaders. They want to preach to you and the public about how you should be raising your children. CEO of City Street Advisory Group, in an interview with Business Insider, says that the corporations must take a stand for marginalized members of their workforce when it comes to protesting Republican legalization. He questioned whether it's LGBTQ rights, whether it's Black Lives Matter, where it's abortion. It's about people at your company feeling marginalized and feeling under attack. So the question is, are you standing up for your employees, or are you saying this group of employees doesn't matter to me as much? I think that is really where the rubber hits the road. This is all preach to me. This is all bullshit. This guy does not give a rat's ass about the black community, doesn't care about gay community, he doesn't care about any community at all. The only thing he cares about is power and money. That's all that matters to these people, and they will say and do anything they have to in order to maintain and accumulate as much of both as they possibly can. CEOs caring about human rights is like the new Ministry of Truth. It's just symptoms of the same problem. Governments pairing up with private entities and massive multinational conglomerates in order to control the public. If the CEOs aren't enough, they start getting in these sort of intellectuals to come in and start preaching to the public, or preaching down to them by saying that, oh, you know, this is good, but people should, all these big massive conglomerates should get involved and start preaching to your children and to you because we know better. We're smarter than you. We went to university and got degrees. I went to the university and got a degree, and I've got to tell you that the people that I met in university, about, I would say 60% of them were essentially yes men. They were indoctrinated in universities and in high school to believe that our professors are God, they know everything, and then they're going to teach us everything there is to know about the world, and that everybody out there who disagrees with you is stupid because they don't have a piece of paper hanging on their wall saying that they spent 4 years studying a subject that half the time they never use. But because you have that piece of paper, you're in a higher position of authority and you get to lecture everybody else around you about how they should be raising their kids, as if they're somehow smarter than you. As if these people in positions, say, out in the middle of a farmland somewhere, if the economy went to absolute shit and everything started to crumble around, it's not going to be people like this, like business Harvard professors, that people are going to give a shit about. It's going to be the plumbers and the carpenters and the roadworks guys. Like, it's going to be those people that people are going to care about. It's not going to be these assholes. And yet they're out here posturing about how they know what's best for you. It isn't surprising that Democrat operatives are openly calling for multinational corporations to weaponize against their political enemies. Corporations are no strangers to doing the bidding of the left. Last year, over 200 companies, including PayPal, Microsoft, Uber, and Under Armour, signed a joint statement condemning Republican election reform efforts to Texas, Georgia, and other states. See, this is where public and private sectors are starting to intertwine. Like, when public and private become one, you get fascism. That's what that is. Where corporatism has been an effective weapon for the left, but that doesn't mean every corporation is looking to become political pawns for progressives. Some CEOs within major companies are now fearing the reality of facing progressive opposition that could force them to take an unpopular stance, alienating their customers as much as Disney did. Yeah, and see, that's the thing. This isn't something that every company wants. Some do, some don't. The ones that don't are going to feel like they're being pushed into this in order to play catch up and keeping up appearances because they're under the impression that the left is the majority ideologically. And yet you discuss anything like this to the normal parent on the street and they find out that Disney's trying to indoctrinate their kids and other companies like them. They go, what? Hell no, piss off. Leave my children alone. It doesn't matter if they vote left or right because every parent agrees that the safety and mental health of their child is paramount to their whole life. Every single goal resides in the minds of every parent out there is their child. And if you are perceived to be doing something that they consider to be detrimental to their child, they want nothing from you. And so these companies are now being pushed by companies like Disney, by governments and the left to try and decide between whether or not they actually go broke, because they will, because parents don't want their children exposed to this shit, or they go woke in order to keep up appearances and hope that they win out over the long term so they can continue to indoctrinate children. Because I don't see how the woke side that companies like Disney are trailing down. I can't imagine they think that there's no money at the end of the tunnel. Maybe they think there's more and that's why they're doing it, or they're just a bunch of, I don't know, evil companies that want to control the way people think and the way they live. The corporations fear that if they refuse to side with progressives, it will cause a PR nightmare among progressive-friendly media and possibly cause a left-wing revolt within their own company. The downside is that siding with the left-wing mob could cause them to sustain massive losses for their shareholders and drive customers away. And see, this is what gets me. They keep saying that these people are progressive. They're not interested in human progression and evolution in terms of becoming stronger as a people and more loving as a people and becoming everything that a human being possibly can be. What they care about is people aligning themselves ideologically with them so that humanity and families become a model of what they want the world to look like. It's not something that's happening organically through the interactions of different people. It's happening the way they want it to because they're authoritarians. They don't want you to be able to live your life the way you want it with your kids and your family. They want you to live the way they want you to live because they know better than you. They're intellectuals. They have a degree. And to me, that just, if corporations are afraid of what the progressives will do to them, but then acknowledge later on that they'll lose money if they do this, proves that these people are not the popular opinion. They're not. Because if they were the popular opinion, every company would do this and benefit financially from it, and they're not. Hence the whole get woke, go broke mantra that you hear more and more and more from the right and the libertarian movements. If this was a popular ideology, parents would have no problem with Disney race-swapping characters, gender-swapping characters, introducing sexuality into kids' and children's books and TV shows. They wouldn't have any problem with that. But they do, which is why these companies go broke, which is why Governor DeSantis revoked, or part of the reason why he revoked the Reedy Creek self-governing status of Walt Disney World was to punish them for it because the people spoke. They wanted their children kept safe in schools. They wanted their children not to be indoctrinated by these companies. And so the Florida government seized the opportunity to take away Disney's special treatment rights and also win over favor from the public. And this is just more and more of a symptom of CEOs, private companies, and big conglomerates tying themselves closer and closer to governments that want more and more authoritarian power and are more than happy to use the progressive left in order to push this ideology. And those people that are pushing this bullshit are ultimately going to suffer along with it as well. They will. They're just under the impression that the world is going to look the way they want it to look and that they'll ultimately benefit from it and everyone else won't. They're all in it for themselves. That's the thing. They're not thinking about kids. They're not trying to teach kids to be more loving. They're only doing it because they think that they're going to benefit from the world they're trying to make everybody else live in, rather than just leaving everybody the hell alone and just producing content that is true to what the source material is, that fans already love, that parents of children who've read the books are already happy to expose their children to, and just produce good quality content rather than trying to lecture the public. But of course, that's not going to stop. This is going to keep happening because once the crazies and the authoritarians are in power, they won't stop until the public starts telling them to shove off and stay out of our kids' lives. Anyway, that's enough for now, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. My little tirade, my little rant throughout this, it's just pissed me off beyond belief. I'm so sick of hearing companies doing this to families and children and then making us out to be the bad guys because this is just obnoxiously being thrown in our faces more and more over and over again. I just can't stand this any longer. And like, nothing against these kids, there's nothing, like, I'm sure these children are lovely that are going to be playing these characters, but it's just to the point now where it's overt, obvious, and it's not because these kids are more talented. It won't be. That I guarantee you that there was probably other kids out there that auditioned that probably were better. And that's what's so disgusting about this. Because they've got a race quota now, more or less, they're going to elevate kids that potentially are less deserving of the part than others because Disney wants to push an agenda. This kid may have been the best in the group. Fair enough. That's awesome. But that doesn't stop people from thinking, did he only get the part because of his color, which is despicable. But I wouldn't put it past them. So anyway, let me know what you all think in the comments down below. Please take the time to like and subscribe and share with your friends and family. Have a good day, everyone. See ya.